Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Quite echoey. Good afternoon, everybody. I've got the graveyard shift to try and keep you awake for the afternoon. A review of whether interdependency exists in effective project control methods and project performance. Long-winded title. My name is Mike Halliday. I work for a company called HKA. My mother tells me to put it on as Michael Halliday whenever I put slides on, so hence that. I'm a QS, done quite a bit of commercial management on M&E projects, civil projects, oil and gas, and then gone into consultancy doing claims and reviewing claims. So, I've got this title again, and really the short of this is it's project controls and the effects on profit. That's what we're really talking about here. So the background, the introduction here is a little bit of a background. We'll go look at the project controls, quick aspect into the definitions, the what, why and how, and then a couple of case studies to sort of conclude with. So this presentation was kind of brought together because of challenges faced and lessons learned when you're implementing those cost control systems. And there's some examples in here of applied systems, or rather the lack of systems, and how this may affect the performance and efficiency of the project. And it comes about when our clients, whether they are employers or contractors, they make the request of what, where, and why has our project gone wrong? What do we need to do to prepare a claim? And everyone wishes a dispute-free contract. So this is a nod really to the project control staff to ensure data which is produced is correct, can be tracked and can be audited, because that provides the foundation for evidence for a claim. That's really what we're talking about here as well. It's just that it's the cornerstone of what our evidence, when we're coming to look at it retrospectively, is. So this is a bit of a claims consultant's perspective, taking best practice and measuring whether the industry does indeed consider best practice being applied. So from the last slide, obviously the purpose of lessons learned is to bring together insights gained during a project that can be usefully applied on future projects. A couple of quotes there, the Duncan Hockey one, in terms of we will continue to commit the same project management sins again and again if we fail to take on board what those lessons learned actually are. So the project control definition, there's a lot of definitions out there, all loosely around the same thing. The AACEI has their cost engineering terminology, 10S90. The Association of Project Management has their definition. And the CIOB Guide to Good Practice in the Management of Complex Projects also has their definition. But they're all loosely the same thing. They're all about data gathering, the management of that data, understanding and constructively influence the time and cost outcomes of projects or programs. And the key aspect here is through the communication of information and formats to assist effective project management and decision making. The CIOB definition has the phrase in there about amending the strategy, because clearly that information that's being presented gives an insight and direction to those in senior management, how they want to change things. Do they continue on in the same vein that they're currently going, or do they need to make changes, small, drastic, or otherwise? So, project controls what? Okay, what are we talking? Well, the control system, I think everybody's aware what it should do. It evolves from the project plan and the project strategy that's been developed. It should comply with the contractual requirements, because all too often our project control system maybe doesn't align with notice provisions or otherwise in the contract. Sometimes a company has done it this way all the time and it's been successful, but they come into new projects with new contracts and they need to make those adjustments. So it needs to dynamically develop and adapt to those changing circumstances and any requirements. It has to aim for that simplicity, the ease of administration and understanding. And we have the project controls, which are essential to the project management tools. The effective delivery of the project, the effective intelligent decision making, easy for me to say, and they provide accurate reporting and provide accurate forecasting. That's what we should be seeing from our project control system. So the essence of a project control system must be that simplicity. Quick diagram here from Cook and Williamson, quite an old diagram, but really what we're looking at is this cyclic process of establishing a standard that we want, planning and forecasting, measuring that, comparing it to what we considered at the outset, and do we need to deviate, do we need to change that, determining an action that we need to take to make the situation better. One key thing here is it has to be the single source of the truth. We want to understand what's being presented to us so that, again, retrospectively, when we come back, we can understand what we're dealing with when we're trying to craft a claim at a later date. This next slide echoes towards the use of EVA techniques, earned value analysis techniques. And this slide was actually from a gentleman, a book, Professor Gerhard Oberlanger in the States. I think I've pronounced his name correctly. And what we're looking at here is obviously the CPI and SPI and how that gives us an indication. We all want to be in the top right-hand box there, ahead of schedule and under budget, but all too often we're not. We're behind, maybe over budget, maybe behind schedule but under budget. And what we've got there is a few sort of indicators, if you like, some of the reasons why we're in that position. So behind schedule and over budget, inaccurate estimates. Maybe we've got weather delays. We've got lower than planned productivity. So when we're looking at that retrospectively, if we've got from our project control system, if we've got that level of information from a claims perspective, it gives us a bit of focus, gives us a bit of direction, where we want to start looking and analysing. Maybe we want to start looking at the productivity. Is that as a result of change control, for example? So knowing where we are allows us to change our strategy accordingly. And that's kind of coming back to the CIOB point of amending our strategy. Do we stay the same? Do we change it? How do we deal with that? Why? Well, why, I'm sure they're all saying, well, that's pretty obvious, really. We want to keep a handle on cost and we want to keep a handle on time. This is an extract from the study from the CIOB quite some years back now, but still very, very pertinent and gives us a guide in that 33% of power generation projects are more than 6 months late. Engineering projects are more than 6 months late. There's a common tail there within these complex projects. And despite the advancement of the software that we have, and there's an abundance of software suppliers out in the main halls here, we still get it wrong. We still have these issues. We still are late, we're still over budget, and sadly I'm still employed doing claims. But few professionals understand the contribution that planning engineers, schedulers actually make and affect that time control. Contractors are the main thing, really, because all too often once they can understand that project schedule or are able to operate it, they think there may be project managers at some stage, and that's where it gives us a bit of a problem in trying to understand the position that's being conveyed. I'm moving on to mega projects. You might wonder why I've kind of jumped from a comment from complex to a mega project, because this is leading into one of our case studies. I know there's another thing going on just now with regard to giga projects and where we're leading to in the world. But mega projects are generally $1 billion or more as a general rule of thumb. Major projects, hundreds of millions, and projects are dealt with in millions, tens of millions. And the characteristics of these mega projects are often problematic because through time they produce failure upon failure. Most of the time, though, this impacts in terms of financial losses, which may be bad enough for taxpayers and other investors who fund such projects, but worse, particularly groups who are often disadvantaged and sometimes forced to carry a disproportionate share of that negative environmental and social impacts from those projects that do not deliver the promised benefits. More so in maybe developing countries, where in this particular instance, we're going to look at a power project where tariffs are extremely high, taxes are high in this regard, and wages are low. So we have technology and designs which are not often standard here. We have large sums of money involved. And there's principal agent problems which are common there also. The ambition of the project changes over time quite significantly. All too often, what started off as a good strategy and a good route develops as time progresses, and money gets invested significantly. We've got complex and unplanned events which are often unaccounted for, leaving budget and time contingencies inadequate. We're going to look at that later. As a consequence, about misinformation about costs, schedule benefits and risks is the norm throughout project development and decision making. There's a good paper which I think take a note of, by a gentleman, Bent Flyberg, Delusion and Deception in Large Infrastructure Projects. Really worth a good read, actually, because they're a different breed of project in terms of the level of aspiration, the lead times, their complexity, and the stakeholder involvement, because it's not necessarily just restricted to that country. They're internationally funded and significant parties involved. So, like we had on the LRCIOB study, we've had cost overruns and benefit shortfalls of 50%, which are common. Cost overruns above 100% are not uncommon. And this gentleman, Bent Flyberg, had carried out a study of mega projects in 20 different countries. 9 out of 10 of them had cost overruns. And this is just a table of the top 20, which I think is quite interesting. The project we're going to talk about is Project X, number 12 on the list. The thing that impresses me most is, since we're in a sporting event, it's not too often that Scotland are near the top of the table. But there's some significant numbers there. 1,600% for the Scottish Parliament building, 1,900% for the Suez Canal in Egypt. I think everybody's familiar with this. Simple slide, time versus cost versus effectiveness. Obviously, as we progress through the construction period, decision-making changes as we progress are going to be significant to cost. I think we're all agreed, we're all aware of that. But time and time again, that project control aspect, is it picking it up? Is it communicating it? Is it, or alternatively, is it being actioned? So project controls, how? Well, I think the first thing about project controls is really about how it's been communicated. And this slide this takes me back to quite a number of years when considering this gentleman, Henry Fail, who had this wheel of managerial activities where planning, organising, directing, commanding, controlling, coordinating and forecasting were all the key aspects for encompassing project control and a project lifecycle. But the main key element in the middle there was communication, because we can have all these systems in place, we can run through software packages, but if we're not communicating that out to certain individuals within the teams, we might not get the information coming back to us to make the right decisions. And they're fundamental in every business, but probably no more so than construction, where the relevant architectural or engineering project progresses at significant pace and like a living entity changing over time. And projects can have a plethora of operatives and trades working like ants, although generally not as efficient, to fulfill the required build sequence. It's therefore imperative to have a project plan in place to achieve control of the project. And if you have, a colleague of mine made a statement, if you have no plan, you cannot possibly have control by definition. So touching on construction claims occur for various reasons, but as a consequence of controlled or uncontrolled changes in the form of scope change, compensation events, variations. Difficult or disorganized work we have poor sequencing, we have inaccurate estimates, technical problems, design errors, resource availability, force majeure events, strikes, weather, war. The management of this process is all too often insufficiently communicated, coordinated and evaluated, and where appropriate, approved and implemented by the affected parties. We've got a process in place, but not all the time is that information being collated and fed back to those that matter, those that are dealing with the programme, the schedule, those that are dealing with looking after the costs. That will again become a little bit more evident as we flow through this. So a change control process, which for me is something that always has to get grasped, because it has to align with the complexity of the project, it has to be systematic, it has to align with the level of reporting that not only you as an organisation need, but that organisation that you're actually employed with. And it has to, again, be aligned with that contract provisions. All parties should be mindful, especially those involved with long project durations, that events which were fresh yesterday are forgotten tomorrow. So the bluntest pencil is better than the sharpest memory. So we look at one of these case studies. This is a mega project. This is a coal-fired power station, 4,788 megawatts. The original budget value of 33.6 billion, which is about 17.8 million, I think, UK. 1.7 billion UK, I'll get it right. With peak workforce of about 8,000. Work commenced around about May 2007 until the first unit, which was Unit 6, was to be commissioned in June 2012. Each of the 5 remaining units were to be commissioned in 9-month intervals thereafter, until completion in the last unit in 2015. So, that was at the outset. This is a mega project. This was on our table. The planned assumption dates in 2013. Now this was being conveyed around about the November of that year. So we've gone from the 2012 date for the first unit to the first sink on the 15th of August 2014 with a commercial operation date in January 2015. So suddenly in November we've moved out quite a significant shift. I think that kind of begs the question where we are on our project controls in this project. We'll again come on to this. So the pertinent facts about this is that the contract is structured as an integrated team between the employer and engineer. All contracts are let between the employer and contractor, with the engineer administering same. So as a contractual basis, same setup, but they're trying to develop this integrated team approach. At this point in 2013, there was 38 large contracts, which was a multi-package contracting strategy, and quite a lot of interface and responsibility between the employer and the engineer, getting to the point of who pays the money, who's going to listen to who. The engineer starts to struggle with that position, because obviously the employer's looking more so, the contractor's looking more so at the employer to pay the bills than anything else, maybe sidelining the engineer. The estimate at this point was 100, gone from 33.6 to 100 to 116 billion, with a peak workforce of 17,000. So we've gone up from 8 to 17,000. If we move on to 2016, the contract is structured as a traditional employer-engineer relationship. Same again, we're trying to divest that current approach of an integrated team and move back to the traditional contractual arrangement. So we've gone from a let's stay together, let's work together, to let's segregate and take on the roles and responsibilities that are actually in our contract. We've now moved up to 45 contracts. Obviously, we've still got a multi-package contracting strategy, and our estimate has now gone up to 139.9 billion, with a peak workforce of 17,000. Where we stand today, obviously our table on the left there is where we were. Where we stand today, we've gone from a commercial operation date of the first unit, Unit 6, 26th of January 15, to, not bad, 30th of August 2015. It's not bad from a first date of June 2012, but we're close to our revised date. As you can see, Unit 5 this year, and Unit 4, I'm told, is coming online pretty soon. The other dates as yet unsure, but on the basis of what we're seeing there, the trend line, if you like, is going to be 2020, 2021 when we will see completion of the final unit in this instance. That's a significant move from our original predictions. Was that delusion at the first instance, or was our estimate wrong, or what was it? This graph here I've just put together, which is just based on the contractor's estimates, no owner's direct cost or anything else. But you can see here, well, maybe not in terms of the dates, we have in December moving out where there's a significant movement in the overall costs. The first, see if we can find the pointer, is it? Maybe not. The first green map was effectively the original completion date, moving on to the other one. So there's quite a wide gap there. But if you look at the overall detail of the trend line during that period, the significant uplift to begin with, and then sharp rises right the way through. It's kind of masked by it being collectively brought together. And we'll move on to some of the individual contracts, which will maybe paint a bit of a better picture as to what was kind of trend lining at the time. If I just jump back there, between the second green line is around about the 2014 mark, and just before you see the forecast cost, the red trend line peaking up quite significantly there. In that period, there was a variance and an increase of about 35 billion, which roughly was as a consequence of 23% of common events being force majeure events, strikes, labour unrest. There was a period of about 3 to 4 months where there was so much unrest there was just no work done in the project at all. There was project labour agreements, safety and conjunction, milestones, etc. for individuals for payments. And the potential current planned assumptions clearly weren't taken on board at this time within the schedule. It wasn't an integrated schedule. It was all done, as we said, a multi-package. It was all done in separate format, not really brought together into a collective, workable schedule that could be considered from a management perspective. But the most significant cause of forecast growth in this one was actually the exchange rate, the CPA, where, because we're moving on in terms of time, that obviously had a significant impact. This is one of the major subcontractors, one of the largest subcontractors. And prior to the green line of when they were meant to be completed, the trend line pretty much aligns with the original budget, the blue line. There's not much difference there. Got to ask yourself the question, why it's running pretty consistent. Do we not know that we're not going to extend this program by, or from 6 months beforehand, are we not going to know that we're going to extend it by a further 6 months, a further year, whatever? It seems to be a lack of control, a lack of project control in this one. And that's pretty much symptomatic. This is the second biggest one. We've had a bit of an uplift in our forecast at the outset, leading up to when they were originally going to complete. So after that, the cost significantly increasing. The biggest one for me, however, is the electrical package, and it looks an interesting pictorial, because consistently, probably up to 2 months before, they were still reporting that they were going to be done on time. The main equipment actually wasn't there. I'm not quite sure where they were going to cable to at that point in time. And the productivity levels they were getting were roughly about 4%. They were requiring around 20%, so an increase from about 100 to, say, 300 individuals, operatives, to actually increase that productivity. Unfortunately, they were unable to do that because of where the location was. They didn't have accommodation. So they had a further restriction of, well, I can't bring people here because I've got no accommodation to actually bring them here. Again, these sort of wishful approaches in where people are going to be, is it that misconception of what the project controls are telling us? Is that the inability to read that? Or is that some other reason behind it? This is the civils contract, which was obviously meant to complete very, very early. That's a consistent forecast leading right the way through over the period, and to this date is not quite finished yet. Obviously, some minor elements to complete. So moving on to the quick case study number 2. Now, this is an interesting one, and I have to thank Paul Kitson. I attended one of his presentations some time ago, and this gave me a bit of a thought for this slide. This particular case study relates to 3 almost identical projects. Their pertinent points are they're within the energy market. Project X, Project Y, and Project Z. Running concurrently. You can see there where the blue being the anticipated gross margin, and currently where they're looking at. They currently don't and haven't had very good project controls. If I look at Project Z in isolation here, you can see that the first 6 months there, 7 months, pretty consistent in how we're reporting on our costs. Looks really quite good. Up until that January 16, February 16, when it starts to take a dip. The red cursor on the screen is actually when they started to introduce a change control process. it was introduced in the February, very slowly, and by the May it was readjusted to be a little bit more specific. And you can see there that within the space of 4 months, the margin has eroded significantly and continues to do so. So within that period, do we not realise that? Are we not communicating it properly? Are we not analysing the information that's presented to us? Or are we just using the schedule as a mere pictorial of what we want it to be? In terms of the change control process, what we did was we tried to when we introduced this, what we tried to do is get an understanding of what areas that we were seeing changing. So we are, in the last slide, we're probably about 4 months away from when we were meant to complete the actual project. We're now in a situation where, say, 6 months prior to that, we've introduced a change control process, and 61% of the change is related to further scope development and design discrepancy at that late stage of the project. For us, that gives us an indication, at least, the reason behind it, and gives us something to go back on and analysing it if we think back to that SPI and CPI grid. We also looked at trying to put in place, or try to work out where the location of that change was, to try and get an understanding of why and where, and that was pretty self-evident from this slide here. It's in a certain area. And just quickly on to conclusions, really. Poor project controls provides inadequate processes or systems, inadequate or incorrect levels of detail. There's possibly many sources of data that come in, but are they used properly? There overlap in terms of reports. And our real-time data, well, we report to the end of a period and then we forecast 2 weeks in advance. But if we're not quite there with all that, are we reporting and forecasting correctly in the first instance? And good project controls, well, a clear process and procedure, a budgeted, loaded schedule, regular and inclusive risk review meetings, and a change control process that we can actually review and take account of. So I think if we go back to the question at the beginning, is there an interdependency between project controls and project performance? I think from maybe the stats we've given you here, that I think there is. So there we go. Thank you very much.